Okay, hello. This is a tutorial where I want to show you how to do a few little things and cover a few things which I haven't recorded, but we might have gone through before. So I want to go through kind of making a simple pot and showing you how you can use a cylinder to make stuff. I'm gonna go over using a curve to essentially make a tall shape like this. And I'm also going to show you how to make these leaves. And since we've done a bit of baking now, I can show you how you can make these leaves using a texture and something like this. And these things at the top here. And if I take off the shadows, you can see this is what they look like with the way that they've been made, and I'll explain all of that. And also, kind of showing a few small things you can do, a few small clever things you can do with texturing, and also to give yourself little details like this. And also I want to show you something about books. A lot of you have a lot of bookcases and are making a million books, and I just want to show you a very easy, efficient way to have different kinds of books without having to UV all of them, so that you can only UV one and make the rest. Right, so that's the stuff we're going to cover. I'm not going to go too in-depth into certain modeling things. Perhaps I might end up doing it anyway. We'll see how it goes. But the very first thing I'm going to start with is making a pot, making a stem, and then how we make leaves out of planes using a texture. And I won't go much into these fancy books and stuff, but then I'll just show you these ones. All right. Okay, so let's get into it. I'm going to save this so that I don't lose it. Move these off to the side. And let's start by making a pot. So I'm just going to make a cylinder and just snap it so it's in the world, so it's a little easier to work with. Bring it up a bit. And I'm just going to add a few edge loops here. And then I can just start grabbing them and scaling them in. And imagine that you're kind of a clay pot maker now, and you're kind of just changing the outward shape of your clay pot and shaping it into something else. That's how I like to imagine when I do stuff like this. And let's move everything down a little bit. This one's a bit too samey as the others. And we'll do something like this. We'll do a lower one. Something like that. And essentially you have something that's kind of like a pot shape. I can bring it up and then do some more, but I kind of like how it goes in, right? And it looks a bit soft, so I'm going to select these edges and harden them. Harden edge. And to give it a bit of a pattern, I'm going to put in another edge here and grab this one, and oops, and then grab this one and pull it out a bit, like that, right? Then grab this and go mesh display harden edge. And we have a little bit of a pattern. You can grab the bottom one actually and do the same. And I think that's given you a bit more. It kind of looks like a piece of candy, honestly. Let's fix that. Let's kind of do something like this maybe. We'll pull this out and pull it in a little. Hasn't changed it too much, to be honest. Something like this, and this one I don't think we'll need actually. And then you have something that's a bit like a pot. If I wanted to, I could just make it a bit taller just to make it look more pot-like. Yeah, that's alright. Now I'm going to get rid of this middle thingy because I'll pull this down a little longer, because what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna throw in one of these circular planes that's up here. And usually I never use these. I can't remember one time that I've actually probably used these. But as I was thinking about what I could do to make this a bit more interesting and usable for you guys, I realized that this might actually be kind of cool in this situation. How far out does it go? It goes about this far. Because you can kind of put it here, and then you can grab bits of it and turn your soft selection on. Just kind of push and pull some bits to make it look like soil if it's a plant pot for a big plant, and it kind of looks like soil. It's kind of just a little more interesting. It's still alright. Yeah, and I did this on this one as well. You got something like this that's kind of wobbly up and down. When you're in a scene that has good lighting, it will be easier to get. And yeah, that's kind of a pot. You can duplicate it, you can kind of shrink it and make little variants. It's just kind of an easy way to add a little bit more clutter and a little bit more interesting detail to your scenes, I think. And if you want it to be really efficient, I'm doing some big changes to this one, but if you want it to be really efficient, this one, you could make it and you could UV it, and then you could duplicate it and change its scale and some other factors, but still keep the same UVs. And you only have to texture one of these, and the same texture can go on the rest. That might have just confused a few of you that aren't super into texturing yet, but for others, you might have been able to get it. Here I have a little collection of random stuff. It kind of looks like makeup at this point, but you could use this technique to make makeup stuff if you want, whatever. Yeah, so those are a bunch of pots. Let's hide these new ones that we made, and let's show you how to make this stem. And you don't have to use this for this weird plant. I just made this up. I didn't like... What I would usually do is I would go on the internet and be like, ah, yes, plant. And I would look for a specific plant which I want to make, and I'd just make one up. But for this moment, for this presentation, I'm just going to make one up. So I'm going to look at my scene from the side, and I'm going to switch from my poly modeling to curves just for a moment. And I'm going to click this curve here with the 3 dots, the 4 dots, the one in here. It's called an EP curve. And I don't know what EP stands for, but that's what it is. And then you can just click, and it's going to make a shape. So I'm going to try and click a bit more carefully, and something that looks more plant-shaped. Or maybe I'll even do something curvy, so you can see what that does. And after that, I'm going to hide this pot for a moment. And here at the bottom, this is where we started our curve, right? So we want to put something here at the start. Wherever you started your curve, that's where you want to put something. So I'm going to go here to my cylinder. I'm going to put in a cylinder. And I'm going to go to its channel box and change its initial starting resolution to something very low, something like 5 or 6. And the reason I do this is because we're going to add a lot of length resolution in a moment. So I want to make sure I'm at a good starting point. And I want to make it the size of, generally the size of the stem that I want, at least to begin with. And now I'm just going to select these faces. You could just go face selection one by one, but I don't like doing that. Boom, boom. And after you've selected the faces, at the top faces for your little object, you can then shift select the curve. So now it's selected both the faces and the curve. And as long as your little faces are right at the start of your curve and not at the end of it, so the start is wherever you first clicked, you can then click extrude, and it's going to send an extrusion all the way to the end of this curve. But if we add our divisions, you're going to get this little dialog pop up, and if not, then when you select this object, you're going to have more stuff in your channel editor now. But you're going to get a little dialog pop up, and it has divisions in there. So if we increase these, it's going to snap the divisions to the curve that we made. And we can increase these enough, and if it goes up to 25 if you slide, but you can type in more. So I'm going to put in 30, or maybe even 40. And you're getting something that's kind of an interesting shape. And before I did that, before you click off, you're like, oh, I want 40, and then click off. Don't click off yet, because you can click this little, you can change the thickness, I think, or no. There's a little dialog box here, which is going to give you a bunch of other stuff you can do. Now, let me see here. There's a, which one do we want? We want twist. Let's try twist. And that's going to twist it inwards. So maybe we could use that. But there's also, and I hope I find it. Maybe I won't find it. There was one that changed how small that is in the beginning. But I can't seem to find it right now, which is okay. So instead I'm just going to grab this little point and do my soft selection. And what happens if I scale? Ooh, it scales too much. I wanted to make this one pointy. But that's okay, we'll leave it as it is for now. you saw the process of it going around. And yes, the little dialog box gives you a bunch of other options that you can play with. And if you click off it, as I said, select your object and go down to your channels, and here you still have poly extrude face, and if you open that, it's going to show you everything still. Is it taper? Yes, it's taper. See, we have taper here. And when we change the number for taper, it's going to make it pointier or stuff. A long time ago, one of my lecturers said that they used this technique in one of the old Final Fantasy games, like Final Fantasy VII, to make a bunch of 2D art. So they'd make it 3D, looking cool and wavy like this, and then they'd like render it, screenshot it, and paint over it, or something like that. And that's how they get a lot of cool art. Anyway, you still have the curve that you drew underneath. You still have this little line, the curve. And as long as you haven't deleted your history yet, you can select this curve, which is here. Ooh, and if you move it, it moves everything still. So you can select this curve. You have your geometry and your curve. Hold right click, and you can go to curve point. So right click, curve point. And there's a bunch of points. Is it curve? No, it's control vertex. Yeah, so select your curve, go to control vertex. So hold right click, control vertex, and it's going to give you these control points, and you can grab these and move your curve, and that's going to move your curve, but because you haven't deleted your history yet, your extrusion is still bound to the curve, so you could make like little adjustments to the shape of your plant. And the cool thing is soft selection also works with this. So I press B and my soft selection still works. I can do some kind of soft movements to get an interesting effect, right? Cool stuff. And I'm happy with it. So I'm gonna delete my history now because I don't want to mess with it anymore, and I need to delete my history anyway. Let's bring our pot back. Right, so now we have this weird thing, and we have a pot. So let's put in, and I've shown you how to do the stem, so let's put in some leaves. Let's just move on and do some leaves. So what these leaves are, they're literally just a square card, right? So if I bring this back to existing material number 1, this is just a square card. But what I've added to it is a texture that makes everything transparent except for where, oops, number 3 maybe, where the leaf is. So the way you do this, and I'll show this right now, let's make a blank plane, right? And I'm going to get rid of all these divisions so they don't get in the way. So here's our blank plane. And if I open our UVs, you can see it has UVs by default, covering the whole UV square, right? So I don't need to export any of these UVs because I know it's just a square picture. And in Photoshop, to make the leaf, all I did was I went online and I found this leaf picture, and I put it on a black background, and I selected the leaf bit, and I filled it with white. So I had a white leaf on a black background. And to find this picture of the leaf, I just went on Google and searched leaf alpha. And then alpha is this kind of image, this black and white image. An alpha image is one which is black and white, and what is white is visible, and what is black will not be visible. That's what an alpha map is. And you make this during either texturing or, you make it for texturing, and when you put this any object with an alpha map in a game engine or a renderer, certain bits will be visible and certain bits won't. The black bits won't, the white will. So how do we do that? Let's just show you. If I go to Photoshop, I won't even do this leaf specifically. I'll just draw something on this black map, right? I'll just draw something with white. So I'm gonna grab my pen here, excuse me, and I'm gonna draw a leaf. Let's draw a leaf. Be the leaf. I wonder if anyone gets that reference. Right, but I need to fill it in. I'm not just drawing a leaf and that's fine, because everything that's white is gonna be visible. So let's actually grab our lasso tool then. Right, and just fill that with white. And now let's save that, export it as, Targa is what we use for games, so that's what I'm gonna do. put it on the desktop. You could do it as a PNG as well. I just like using targas. Example leaf, right? Save it as targa. So this is the picture that I exported. Let's go back to Maya. Select this plane. I want to give it a new material, so assign a favorite material Lambert. And I'm going to go here to the end of Lambert, and you've seen me do a few of these things before. Now let me show you the color, right? Just so you see what it's going to look like. So this is essentially what we just made. We made this picture that looks like this. But we don't want it to show us the color for this. We want it to read this map as transparency. And the white stuff will be visible and the black stuff will be transparent. That's what we want, right? So we don't want to put in color. We want that map to go into transparency. So I'm going to click here in transparency, the little checker box that's saying what kind of map do you want. I want a file. I'm going to click the little folder that's asking me which folder do you want. And I'm going to click example leaf, just as I did before. And now, if you notice, it's not showing us the colors, it's showing us transparency. So that map was transparency information. And I can still change the color and everything else. But the transparency is staying the same. It's still the same asset. You can even still model on top of it. So I can still add edge loops and stuff. Let me take off soft selection. And I can like still manipulate this model just as if it was anything else. The only thing I should probably try not doing is opening the UVs and messing with those. Because if I select this asset and I start messing with the UVs, it's going to actually change what part of my texture I have visible. So if I add that same texture to the color, just so you get an idea of how it looks in the UVs, right? And let's open our UVs now. Now you can see this is, because I put it in the color, it's showing me the preview of it. So I put it in color and transparency. So because it's in color, it's showing me the preview in the UV editor. And you can see if I start moving this now, it's gonna mess with it. But the model itself, as long as we don't do anything to it that combines it or deletes details or stuff like that. So like if I delete a face, it's obviously gonna delete the UVs for that face, right? But we can add details to it and we can carry on modeling. So what I did for those ones, before I even made the texture for them, I just made this shape. So I made this plane. Let me undo a bunch of this stuff. There. So I added a bunch of loops here. And I pulled them out a bit so it's a bit more leaf shaped. And then I just scaled it down. I put my pivot point here. I created the texture for it and I stuck it on the model. I stuck it on the thingy. And here something cool I can do is because this vertice corresponds to the UVs, if I change individual parts of the model like this vertice, it's going to change the model but not the UVs. So as long as I don't delete anything, I can still move stuff. See, I'm moving this and it's changing the model, but the UVs are staying the same, which means I can make some squishing and stretching as well. So I can do something like this. So it's going to pinch a bit more. And again, this isn't the best way. I'm rushing, essentially, as I always say in these videos. I'm doing this stuff really quickly. I'm not being careful. And as you can see, I'm even getting some little issues. I would recommend being careful about it, making a proper texture, a proper leaf texture, and having a more good-looking plane. Like this isn't what I would use. I would create a plane that looks like, looks something more like, let's see, something like this, right? And then I would apply the texture that I've made for it. So let's use the leaf one, the proper leaf one, right? And then I would change it a little bit. So I would move it up a little and I would probably like squeeze these in a little. Maybe even these ones a little, squeeze them in. And I could pull these ones down a little. So it's just a little bit more like interestingly shaped. Then I would duplicate this and I would place the duplicate. I would leave the original so I have it as a reference. And in case I ever want to duplicate the original. And then I would kind of put my pivot point where I want it. This isn't a very good texture because it has a stick. I should have gotten rid of the stick, but I can still put this, snap this to the model and arrange it how I want to arrange it. So yeah, you shouldn't have a stick in your stuff. And you should have a reference so that you're actually trying to make a real plant and not making up some ridiculous plant like I'm doing, right? But this is how you get leaves, by using alphas. And if you wanted to, I could go back to Photoshop and this leaf that I made, this one, or rather found online, I could export this as well. So I could export the color as well. So I can export this. Let's put it as a targa. Let's replace the one. Right, so let's go back to Maya, and here on this, the texture for this leaf, I'm going to add a color that's in the same position as the alpha, the same position as the black and white image. So it should give us an interesting kind of color. I don't want to see you guys using images from photos that you haven't at least edited a little. It just looks really fake. So for now, I wouldn't worry about texturing the leaves. It's okay to do it, but you know, change it up a bit. Like clean up these fuzzy edges, paint over a little bit if you want to do this so it has a nicer look. Essentially, this is texturing, and I don't want us to do texturing yet. So don't worry about what's in the leaf. Just worry about, you know, the shape of it and use an alpha. Don't do color stuff yet. But I just wanted to show you that, you know, that's something we're gonna do later on. Okay. Okay, so that's the main stuff about plants and leaves and pots and stuff that I wanted to go over. Let's delete these thingies. Is there anything else here that I wanted to show you about this? These things, I essentially drew, I made cylinders and I exported their UVs. So if I select these flowers, let's select these top flowers. Right? These are just cylinders that are in a shape. So if I get rid of the texturing, this is what they look like. And this is what the leaves look like, cards. And this is just a cylinder, right? That's inside out. And I took their UVs, so UV editor, took their UVs, and I selected them. And I went to image, UV snapshot, and I chose where to save them, and I applied, and that exports the UVs. And in Photoshop, I put them in. I put the UVs in, and I painted over them. And I created my own alphas this way. And essentially, I created a texture so that I can make some custom flowers and things. So you can do it yourself as well. You don't have to use something from the web. You can do it yourself. Yeah, so I think that's the last thing I wanted to cover for plants. Now let's go over a few of these other bits here before I move on to the books, and I'm hoping that this is going to be rather brief. So the book itself, this big fancy one, I just wanted to show you that you can make a book that's a little more fancy. I had some beveled edges and stuff on the sides. I made it a bit rounder. I extruded. It's essentially just a cube that I made some extrusions of and made some bends and rounded edges so it looks a bit more interesting. And then I added these little corner pieces for it as well. And again, this is just a cube that I, you know, cut up a bit and beveled a bit so it looks a bit interesting. And I put it on each corner of the book so that now this looks like a more interesting asset rather than just a cube like these books in the back here. And these are fine for filling up bookshelves. But if you have something that you want to be more visible, more focal, something that you're looking at more and looks more interesting, add a bit more detail to it. It goes a long way. And I put a piece of paper inside with some text. And essentially this is just a plane that I shaped like a piece of paper. And then I took its UVs and I put it in Photoshop and drew over it essentially. So I think it's right here. Yeah, it's just this. So I filled it with a color and I wrote some stuff and that showed up on the paper when I applied it as a texture. Again, you don't need to worry about texturing right now, but I wanted to show you that it's something you can do later on. So if you want to put little pieces of paper and details in your books to make them look more interesting and more like filled with stuff like a diary or whatever, this is something you can do. Moving on, I did a little bookmark And the bookmarks are the easiest thing in the world. It just adds a little bit of flair to what you're making. Obviously, it's not very realistic. It doesn't have any folds, but all a bookmark is I made a plane again, and I'm just going to take off all its thingies as always. Right, and I positioned it to kind of where I wanted it in the book, and I put it in a bit, and I pushed it in to the book like a bookmark. You can add then an edge loop for where you want it to start bending, and another edge loop for where it's going to continue bending. So I can then grab this face and pull it down forwards, so it's going to be like a bend, right? And then for the little bit after it, I took the multi-cut tool and I just cut like, well, first you can add a piece here, then you can just go like that, like that, and this can go here. I guess you didn't even need these side bits. And then I deleted this face here, boom, it's like that. And just to make it a bit rounder, you don't really need to because you don't really see it from far away, so you don't even need to make this rounder, but if you wanted to, you could click this and bevel it, and just give it a little bit of a bevel so that it looks a bit more natural. And then soften it, of course. Oops. Right. That's a little bookmark. This cloth, again, I didn't simulate it. This was just made by hand, and I will show you once more. And of course, everything starts with a plane. For some reason today everything starts with this plane. So I get rid of everything, and I can put a little edge here and here so that I have it going across, and now I can start putting a bunch of edges in between here, knowing I'm not going to get any errors. I'm not going to get any five-sided faces if I first cut it in half. And do some stuff here. And what I did then is I inserted in between one of these and put it up so it looks like a fold, but then because a fold pulls the rest of the paper in, I need to kind of grab the rest and kind of shoot it in a little so that it looks like it's being pulled. And I think I need to grab these as well. Push it in so it looks like it's getting pulled, and it's already looking like a bit of a fold. If you want it, like, you'd see this from far away, so you don't really need to worry about it so much. And for the little fold after that, you could just take, you could put in a few edge loops here, and you can grab this point at the end, and you could just move it on over, so it's folded over. You can push it down so it's like almost down. And then these edges that you've just made, you can then move, and I'm going to go into component mode. You can just move them over to make a softer shape. And it looks like a folded piece of cloth or a piece of paper. So you could do it yourself, you don't need to use simulation sometimes. And because I know it's a little napkin, I don't need to worry about adding any more detail than this. If it was like a carpet or something, I would add in a little more detail to make it look a bit less blocky. But that would be probably as far as I go. Maybe a little more, because you can see the angles on the end. Yeah, but only if it was a carpet or something. If it's just a tiny napkin, it's like you don't see the difference. Anything else before we move on to books? The pen is just a cylinder. This is literally just a cylinder. Right, that I just made the middles bigger and pulled the center out, and I deleted this cap. And this, the nib, is again a cylinder which I put a line through and cut off the ends and a bit of the middle and just stretched it a bit. I will show that very briefly. So pen, long, line, 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 small, oops, small, slightly less small, big, slightly less small, small, very small. Maybe this is too big. Yeah, it looks a bit too big. It's like a rocket. And I can grab this pointy bit and pull it out if I wanted to. Right, so it's kind of like a stylus, it's kind of like a quill. And you can be as fiddly as you want with this stuff. And the bit after it was, I actually just duplicated it because I couldn't be asked to do all that stuff all over again. And I deleted the edges that I didn't want. Put that in, select the thing, modify center pivot to center the pivot because I couldn't see where it was. And then I just kind of, let's do this. Let's just insert an edge loop and then delete these front faces. Face selection. Thank you. And let's delete a bunch of these faces because we don't need them. And let's insert some more edge loops here. Now you can just, and then I think I use the multi-cut tool like this to just kind of cut into them. And I did it in a symmetrical way, so I was kind of like, okay, I'm gonna click here and then I'm gonna hold shift, do the middle, and then the corner, middle, and the corner. So if you hold shift, it gives you the middle of whatever you're clicking on. Middle, corner, all right? And this one we could pull out a bit, so it's sharp. World, thank you. And this excess we can just delete. Right, and we have a bit of a quill. If I want it to be fancier, I could like grab these bits and pull them back, make like more of a fancy shape. And what I did after that was I just deleted 2 middle bits to make it look slightly more interesting. And that's a quill. Ta-da! Doesn't need any more detail than that because you're not going to see it. Okay, so the rest is a pot, and I've shown you how to make pots already, right? I've shown you how to make pots, and the top is just like a separate piece. I had a reference right in front of me. I used my own ink pot as a reference, so it worked pretty well. Okay, all right. Oh my goodness, so much talking. I'm gonna call this pot stuff done for now. My Maya is starting to complain as well, if you can't notice. It's like not updating straight away. So I'm just gonna cover these books very quickly. So I made one book, and if I open its UVs, I UV'd it as well, and you can see this book is literally just a square. It is just a square. There's nothing fancy about it, right? And I UV'd it, so let me hide its texture for now. I selected the book and I UV'd it, so you can see these are the UVs. If I hide the thing, so these are the UVs for the map. I made the front part that I wanted to be the cover. I made sure I cut that out and I laid it out so it's a big part of the top. And then the middle bits that are gonna be the paper, I cut them out and laid them down flat on the bottom. And then I copy pasted this book over and over. So each one of these books has the exact same UVs. So I made and UV'd this one first, and then I copy pasted it over. Then I wanted to add a texture to this book. So I exported its UVs, I selected the shells, I get an image, UV snapshot, and I exported them. And I went to Photoshop, and I put the UVs in, and this is what it looked like. It looked like just a black scene with the UVs in, and I filled them in with white so I could easily select those areas. And I put over a paper texture over where the paper is, and then I found a book cover image and I put it on here, and I deleted almost everything because I don't want to have copyright or whatever, which no one's gonna care, but you know, just for the sake of it. So I found a book cover, right, and I put it in this UV space. And here's some text. And I hid the UVs so I don't see them because you can see the line is still visible, so I don't want to see that. And then I exported this as a picture. And I exported that picture and I went to Maya and I put it on the book. So if I select this book, isolate it, this is the picture, right? So if I select it and then select the UVs, you can see that this is the same texture. It fitted perfectly. But I don't want to have all the books use the same texture, because then it's going to be really boring. So, and because they all share the same UVs, they all fit the texture perfectly. Like I changed the scale, but just because I changed the scale doesn't change the UVs. I'm just changing the 3D aspect. I'm not changing the 2D aspect, right? Not changing the UVs. So even though I copy and pasted this book, I don't want them to all look the same. So what I did was I went back to Photoshop, and what you can do is you can find a completely different book cover and just replace this one using the same UVs, and that would be fine. I didn't want to go for all that just for this because essentially it wouldn't prove any more of the point. And instead I just changed the color, right? So that's me being lazy. But what you can do is you can find a completely different book cover and replace it entirely. So what I ended up doing was exporting each of these images with different text, and instead of like me, for me, I just changed the color using a hue shifter. But for you, you would have an entirely different image for each book that you want. And you don't need like a million books, you just need 3 or 4 different ones to make it look like it has variety. But then I just came through here and I applied a different material that has a different book for each of these. So which one is it? 7, isn't it? So here's 7, and it's pretty much the same. I just changed the color. I keep saying that, but essentially this is how you can really easily and efficiently have different books for your libraries, because some of you are thinking that you have to do every single book and it's going to take you 7 million years, and you're absolutely right. It is going to take you 7 million years if you have 100 books in your bookshelves and you want to UV and texture each one. That's not fair. You shouldn't have to. That's not feasible. People don't do that. Instead, make one gosh darn book, copy and paste it across your library, and just make a variety of the same texture, or make a bunch of different textures and apply it, and then you're going to have a bunch of different books. And that was way less work for me to do than to make every single one and UV every single one separately and do all of those sorts of things. Something you can even do for those of you that have really big libraries is you can essentially do something like this, where you let's make a really quick library bookshelf just for the sake of this presentation. That is my alarm telling me to turn on my boiler. Apologies. So here is our bookcase, right? This is our bookcase. It looks a bit like an oven. That's okay. It's fine for now. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn on my shadows so you can see a bit better. So I'm gonna put in how you would usually put in a book, but instead of a book, I'm gonna put in something that goes from side to side, right? Bring it up a bit. Maybe too much, because I'm not starting from the bottom, am I? Let me snap it to the bottom. But bing, cool. So I'm gonna have something like this, and then I can come in here and I can put in the individual books that I'm gonna have, right? This is kind of like me doing something like this. And then you can start extruding the in-betweens so that they're different. I'll pull these up, right? And now it looks like a castle, which is not what we want. But what we can do is we can grab these sections and we can start essentially simulating different book sizes. But you have to be careful because you don't want to make wonky books, see? So I'm going to have to like pull these manually. You can make them different lengths, different sizes. Stuff like this. And then you can grab the in-betweens as well and just move them closer or further away if you want to be more consistent. And let's say that all of these books in the middle are going to be the same height, so you can ignore that. And then you can UV this and just put book covers on the front instead of having to have a whole book. Now, disclaimer, this looks ugly and I don't want you guys to do this, but if you have like, and to be honest, you'd have to fiddle around with it because you'd have to like put little bits inside in between just to make it look like there's some kind of difference between the two. You'd have to do something weird like this, push them in, and then you'd have to like harden edges and stuff. Oh my god, that's too much work. But you could do something like this if you're careful and you want to do the whole thing. I wouldn't recommend it. I would recommend it only if you have like a massive bookcase and you have like 3 of them. So you have rows and rows and rows of books. It might be easier to just texture a whole row of books at once from the front rather than having to do them all the way around. But that's only if you have a really big bookcase. Otherwise, having said all of that, unless you have those giant bookshelves, they're like big libraries or whatever, that's when this is more efficient and necessary, but it doesn't look as good. So I would recommend stick with this method and it might look a bit better. All right, so that was like the last mini segue for this presentation. And I think we're good. I think you guys get the business, get the idea. Yeah, that's it. So let me just find all the stuff that we just hid. And let's open up our fancy plant so we can recap. So I showed you, where's my book? Fancy book, there we go. And our quill ink pot, cool. So I showed you how to make a pot, and I showed you how to, what's this curve doing here? Showed you how to make a pot and make variations of them. You can easily just move them and scale them down, and now you have a cute little pot. For your quill, that's so clever. Look at me reusing assets. Something like this. Bada bing. Very nice. Can you tell I'm getting distracted? It's very late in the evening, I apologize. But yes, I showed you how to make a pot. I showed you how to make these kind of stems from curves, and you can use this for all sorts of things, not just stems. You can use it for cables, you can use it for a bunch of different stuff. Anything that's string shaped, pretty much. Even spaghetti. Don't use it for spaghetti though, that's stupid. And I showed you how you can make leaves out of planes and alpha images. I showed you how to kind of do fancy books and little assets like this, cloth and bookmarks and cloth and books more efficiently so that you don't have to UV every single book. So that's a few different things that maybe will be useful for you when you're trying to add clutter. I know it's mostly book shaped, but generally anything you want to make, like lamps, plug sockets, magazines, newspapers, little pots, little boxes, plates or glasses, all of this stuff, it's little pieces of clutter, and arranging them kind of like this and using these different techniques is going to help make your rooms look a lot more lived in and a lot more interesting. Right, so I hope all of that was useful. Have a nice evening or whatever part of the day you're at the moment, and I'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.